Pavlov discovered classical conditioning, and what Pavlov suggested was that if you had a stimulus that provoked a reflex or significant response, e.g. for example the presentation of food to dogs, then they have a reflex response that would make them salivate. If you then linked, what he did was linked the reflex response with some unrelated stimulus, such as the sound of a bell, if he could do that, then what Pavlov proved is that if you linked the unrelated stimulus, you could also provoke that same response to the dog, and the dog salivated. So when Pavlov rang the bell, the dog salivated even though no food was produced. So that was the initial work that Pavlov did. Watson then introduced the idea of the stimulus response model, or behaviour objectivism model. And he was influenced by the work of Pavlov, and he was influenced by work of Pavlov's conditioned reflexes. And Watson adapted and adopted Pavlov's reflexological terminology to human behaviour. And in 1920 he published his Little Albert study. And in this study he produced in a small child a fear response of white rabbit. And he introduced the fear response by repeatedly pairing the white rabbit with a very loud clanging noise of a metal bar. And this conditioned fear, so he conditioned the fear, and this conditioned fear was then he found was generalised to all white furry things. So it was much more general than just the white rabbit. And the child even became scared of the Santa Claus mask and of Watson himself, who had white fluffy hair. In essence, there was three things that underpinned Watson's stimulus response model. There's observable behaviour. That it is observable behaviour rather than internal thought process that are the focus of study. In particular, learning is manifested by a change in behaviour. The second point is that the environment shapes one behaviour. What one learns is determined by the elements in the environment, not by the individual learner. And the third point is the principles of contiguity, how close in time two events must be for a bond to be formed, and reinforcement, any means of increasing the likelihood that an event will be repeated, are central to explaining the learning process. Teachers can apply classical conditioning techniques to their class by creating a positive classroom environment to help students overcome anxiety or fear. Pairing an anxiety-provoking situation such as performing in front of a group or class with pleasant surrounding helps students to learn new associations instead of feeling anxious and tense in these situations, and the child learns to stay relaxed and feel calm. That's the end of me.
Okay, so following on from the other behaviourist theorists, we're looking at connectionism. And connectionism is really joining together and connecting the stimuli and the response which produces a behaviour. And it's often associated with a theorist called Thorndike. And Thorndike was actually one of the first pioneers of active learning, and he talks about something called the law of effect, which is basically he realised that successful behaviour, the probability of it being repeated within similar or the same circumstances. And he looked at how behaviours that followed good consequences were much more likely to be repeated in the future. And he actually took an experiment of putting a cat in a box, and the cat had to press the lever in order to get out of the box. And he found that obviously the cat wanted the door to open, and it was more likely to press the lever in order to escape and repeat that process because there was a positive outcome. And building on that, what the next theorist, Skinner. And when we talk about Skinner, we're actually moving in now with these theories into something called operant conditioning. And this is really when a particular stimuli response pattern is reinforced or rewarded. There's some benefit from repeating the behaviour. So, just to encourage you, I have a little something. Donut. So, he realised that if a positive response was given, or a positive reward, positive reinforcement was given, the behaviour was much more likely to be repeated. So if I gave you a donut because you succeeded in a task, you might be more tempted to repeat that behaviour again, knowing that at the end of it you would get one of these. However, if every time you repeated the behaviour you were given a donut, you might very soon be sick of donuts. And so Skinner deducted from that actually it was more beneficial to give occasional reward, or maybe to vary the reward, something a little healthier, in order to inspire and motivate somebody to, with the thought of a possible reward, that they're more likely to repeat that behaviour in the future. So giving a gold sticker every single time a child does an essay is perhaps demotivating rather than motivating. Very nice.
Social learning theory is something which was introduced predominantly by a person called Bandura. His suggestion is that whereas in pure behaviourism we learn exclusively by doing, we can use observational learning where we learn by observing what others are doing. This method avoids certain hazards which come with pure behaviourist learning, such as hazardous trial and error. A person watches as somebody else performs a task, and by observing their actions and the outcomes of their actions, they generate a model inside their head of how this task works and the results which come from performing this task. Following observation and modelling, the person may choose to imitate this. We are now moving back towards the more behaviouristic approach, where having observed, the person attempts the action themselves. However, there is also an issue of motivation which Bandura introduces in social learning theory, such that the person who has observed both the actions and the outcomes will, based on the outcomes, decide whether or not they consider it worth doing the action in the first place. This is a very efficient way of learning because lots of students can observe one person performing an action and learn that way, rather than all students needing to perform all actions.